Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Conservationists Assemble podcast, the show that seeks to unite Earth's mightiest advocates in a mission to ensure a future for our planet's incredible habitats and its awesome inhabitants. I am your host, Johnny Bloxham, and today's episode is putting a spotlight on the Diana monkey and the West African Primate Conservation Action, otherwise known as WAPCA. Join the podcast and today's expert guest as we discuss everything about this species and the conservation efforts directed at their survival. This week's expert guest is none other than Andrea Dempsey, Programme Manager of WAPCA and EEP Programme Coordinator for the Diana monkey, amongst many other aspects of her role, which we shall be discussing today. Please welcome Andrea as she joins the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble initiative to shed her passion, knowledge and experience on Diana monkeys and conservation. Andrea, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. How's it going?
All good, thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. I'm thrilled to pick your brains about everything. You've certainly got many different aspects to your role, and I'm sure we're going to dissect that in a bit more detail as we work through the interview today. But we are here to talk mainly about Diana monkeys and the role of the West African Primate Conservation Action, or WAPCA. So first and foremost, could you tell us a little bit about Diana monkeys, please?
Yeah, so Diana monkeys are a type of guenon from the Afro-Eurasian monkey taxa, and they're found in West Africa through sort of Sierra Leone, Côte d'Ivoire, no further along the West African coast from there. They have a very distinctive behind, should we say, which is kind of like an orange with this kind of white bow. And that's where they got their name from this mythical character, Diana, who had always used the bow and arrow. And that's where their name originates from. They were some time ago considered subspecies with the rollaway monkey, which is also found in West Africa, only in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, but it's distinctively different because it has this very long, beautiful white beard. And they are there's very few rollaway monkeys in the wild. They are critically endangered, whereas the Diana monkey still remains in a lot of its habitat. But you can sometimes get confused between the two species, but they are recognized at species level now. And the main difference is this very distinctive white beard that the rollaway monkey has. And they're a very vocal species. They like to scream and yell, and normally very female-led. So they do give their husbands a bit of a hard time when they are introduced, but we try and keep our females together because you can't really in captivity put unrelated females together. They can be quite handbags at dawn if you do that. So they're an interesting species to work with.
Yeah, I'm sure that probably then, would you say a lot left to learn about their social dynamics?
Yeah, there is. I mean, we know for this species, there is quite a bit of wild data out there, thanks to predominantly a big project in Côte d'Ivoire. So we do know quite a bit about this species. But yes, they're always we have luckily as well in the zoo community a good guenon knowledge from colleagues in the UK such as Tony Dobbs, and then in Europe in Ostrava as well, Jana, because they can be tricky to put together as groups. They definitely can be a bit more complicated than other guenons. For example, the Debraza monkeys are much easier. They're a bit more chilled. Or other Afro-Eurasian monkeys like mangabeys that are equally quite a chilled species to put together. The male dominates and he keeps them all in line, and they're also quite communicative, so you can kind of read them a bit easier, whereas Dianas just tend to sometimes decide they don't like each other.
keep you on your toes, to say the very least.
But they're a lovely species and people should have them in their zoos. I should say that.
And you mentioned, obviously, in comparison to the rollaway monkey, the Diana monkey is found more commonly throughout their range. But why are we talking about Diana monkeys? What is their classification and kind of population trends?
So they're considered endangered by IUCN, so they're still under threat of extinction. And it's very similar to lots of other species in terms of habitat loss, through urbanization, as populations get bigger, they spread out more from the urban cities out to the rural, and that's then the forests go for housing, for roads. There's also agriculture as well. So particularly in Côte d'Ivoire is the biggest exporter of cocoa, and lots of habitat is lost from that clearing for agriculture. Also in the west coast of Africa was historically known as the Gold Coast because it has a lot of minerals. So gold being the obvious one, but also gas and oil, bauxite, which is aluminium, and obviously clearing forests for that. Hunted as well, beyond sort of subsistence hunting for local consumption, large large levels of hunting also occurs for the species as well. Probably less so than other primate species because they use the upper canopy. They don't come to ground very often, but because their habitat crosses with baboons and mangabes that are terrestrial, they have this kind of lookout system. So if they're traveling with ground dwelling monkeys, they may come down a bit lower, but they wouldn't fall into those same literal traps that are left for duiker and other hoof stock that our terrestrial monkeys would. But they will be discriminately hunted with guns rather than traps. So there's that, and the other kind of issues that we're all facing, such as climate change, water levels rising. They are found sometimes in swampy areas that can kind of become out of control in terms of water levels, and general human encroachment, I guess, is the usual suspects, but affect the Diana monkeys as well.
Yeah, I mean, you've talked nicely on kind of their role within the ecosystem. It sounds like they are quite adaptable in the sense that they can be quite, as a species, quite independent, but also they're quite cooperative in other ways too, and that's quite interesting to see that adaptable.
Yeah, and I think it's out of need, of course, because uh, they move in these groups and they use these groups for their advantage. But obviously, of course, they're seed dispersers as well as they move through the forest. That important, as you say, ecological role. And the Diana monkey would seem to have adapted perhaps more than the rollaway, and that's why we're seeing different levels of population. The rollaway really only found in two forests that we know of, and in very low numbers. Equally, looking at a reserve population held in our zoos, unfortunately as well, they're very low in numbers, and obviously you then get genetic complications there. So the rollaway is certainly more in peril than the Diana monkey, but that may be just, it's the matter of time that it goes the same way, but hopefully not. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully not, indeed. So, in terms of the conservation actions surrounding Diana monkeys, then, what kind of things are happening in order to try and change the outcome for Diana monkeys?
So with any conservation effort, it's really important that you use the one plan approach, which is what WAPCA does, which means including all members of society and governments, whether they're inside or outside their range. So that's where zoos can play their part in terms of reserve populations, capacity building, and of course funding. But what's really crucial there is to bring in local people, your local communities, not only on an ethical level, but also on a sustainable level. We have this phrase that I've kind of used before, you know, when people do conservation, when they leave, that conservation stops. When they go home, it stops. But if the people doing conservation are already at home, then it's not going to stop. And I think this is a real kind of, there's this huge movement now to stop the Western world being the gatekeepers of the funding and the gatekeepers of all the conservation work. Local people must play a crucial role in that. So we look at, for the Dianas in particular, we're working with a local research unit that's headed by a very famous primatologist, Professor Inzakoni, who's an Ivorian primatologist, and we're working in the Thai National Park. And there's been a monkey project there called the Thai Monkey Project since 1989. And it's predominantly research, but it's research conducted by Ivorians, really bringing primatology to the table as a recognised and worthy profession. And what they've seen is that where they've been collecting data on habituated groups of Diana monkeys, which is quite unusual, there are other primates there, another type of mangabe, and what they see by just having that presence there, they are protecting them because there's eyes on them all the time. And it's a national park, so it's protected by government. And that kind of, even though it's not kind of patrols or anything like that, that research, those researchers are protecting those primates, because what they've seen in the other areas that they're not active in, there's less monkeys and high levels of illegal activity. So what WAPCA will be doing, we're just in the process of signing an MOU, is going in partnership with the Thai Monkey Project, creating the Sudbury Monkey Project, which is the nearest town, and essentially replicating the great work of the Thai Monkey Project here. But by being there as researchers, we collect data so we can learn more about these species. We can then compare it with this huge data set that they already have. But also by having that presence, we're protecting those primates. And that's great. And we're really excited to do that. But what WAPCA's real ethos is looking at it at a wider project, a landscape level, and looking at those local people that are coming into the forest. Because at the end of the day, and this is what we've done in Ghana, those people that are hunting or taking lumber, they're just trying to make some money to feed their family. And we all do that. So we need to look at that problem as well. It's not conservation is no longer looking at just those species and putting a fence around them and going, we have to look at that at a social economic level and go, right, these people, they're just trying to stay alive. So how can we, by helping them through nature-based solutions, through a share and benefit mechanism, protect the forest, protect the primates, but also recognise the needs of the local people as well. So that's really what we long term, and as I say, what we've done in Ghana around habitat of the mangabe and the rollaway, providing these sustainable livelihoods. It's not necessarily alternative livelihoods, because that's kind of not giving any credit to a skill that these local people have. It's going, well, you don't want to be doing that, you want to be doing this. And they're like, well, I don't want to do that. I'm a skilled cocoa farmer. So we already look what's in the area. In Ghana, it's cocoa and coconut, and just giving them the tools and the skills to do this to a decent level. So having good agricultural practices and good environmental practices, because another thing that happens is if they have a small farmland, say, and they're not getting a good price for starters from the government, and they're not got the best practices, so they're not getting a great crop, they make their farms bigger, and those farms get bigger and bigger, and then they encroach onto the forest. But if we say, well, keep your farm rather the same size, but we're going to help you improve your practices, so you're going to get more crops. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect you to the private sector. You can be organic, so you can get a premium, but you get a decent price for your produce. So you don't need to supplement your income by going into the forest and hunting or lumbering for some big company that's asking. But it's still very difficult, because these big companies will come in and offer them 10 times their salary for the whole year. And that's very difficult to say no to. So although we can support local people to have a sustainable livelihood, a decent wage, it's the governments and these big companies that come in that need to also address their practices really before we can make some real change. And we can do that ourselves as consumers. If you're getting something really cheap, there's somebody at the end of that value chain that's getting no money. So even sometimes we sit here in Europe and go, well, how can we impact that? you can do it through consumer, and consumerism can have a huge voice, because if people aren't going to get your money, they soon start changing those practices. And I think we've seen that through sustainable palm oil, where there was a real big, shift in consumerism, and not banning palm oil, because again, look at end of that value chain, there's going to be a palm oil farmer that's not going to get the income. But pushing that agenda for sustainable produce is, I think, really the way forward uh, for what we can do for all species. It's not particular, obviously, to primates, but palm oil, as we know, plantations are really a real issue. So that's what we hope we can do for Diana monkeys, as well as obviously um, bringing in the communities to look at their livelihoods, but look at conservation education. It's very hard to change behaviour of adults. We all get stuck in our ways. But as we know, that younger generation, if they grow up as an automatic kind of way of living that is better for the environment, then that helps as well as tree nurseries we do, and patrols and things like that. But it all comes from the communities, and WAPCA is a Ghanaian-run organisation. It's they call the shots, they make the decisions. We're there to provide logistics and funding, but we have this long-term plan where they then become self-sustainable through their livelihoods, through the private sector that pay them not only a premium for being organic or premium for their produce, they also then pay a certain amount into a conservation fund. So by providing this produce, they're also providing funds for what we would pay for. So for patrols, for nurseries, for seeds, for meetings, for transport costs for meetings. That conservation fund starts to pay for that. And then WAPCA financially can start to move away, and this project becomes completely self-funding, which is great, because we see so many projects with NGOs that mean well, but they throw money at it for a period of time for that funding lasts, and they tick the boxes of all the buzzwords that they've used to get that funding. And when the funding's finished, the NGO goes and the project falls flat. And WAPCA's ethos is not like that. We stay there. We're driven and directed by the communities for as long as they need us, with the long-term plan to hand over that completely autonomous to the communities.
Yeah, that sounds really incredible, and I suppose then it's also hopefully going to provide a model for other conservation organisations that A already exist, or B that are going to exist in the future. It's again that kind of team approach. So
I
yeah,
hope so. And I think there is that shift now um, to move away from this kind of colonial need for a white person to be there. As certainly for WAPCA, there are plenty of Ghanaians that could do my job and probably better. It's a low bar, but absolutely. And I was at, it really struck me, there is this whole movement, a brilliant movement for decolonizing primatology, and using the language that they use, the terminology we use, and recognizing local researchers in papers that we publish, and all that. And I was at the African Protected Areas Congress, and we were talking about this, as there always being this Western gatekeeper of funding, that funders won't fund local entities. It always has to go through some sort of Western gatekeeper. And we were at this talk, and there was on this panel, scientists, researchers, professors, doctorates, all African, and they said, Western world keeps talking about capacity building, but you're sat in front of highly skilled people, and yet what point have we built enough capacity that you allow us to actually manage our natural resources? And I think that's so true, and I really hope that becomes more and more as we conserve this planet, I guess.
yeah. I mean, it gets to the point that everything's evidence based, isn't it? And how are you going to know until you try?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And uh I think it's really important, as I say, for anything to be sustainable, local people, wherever you are, in the UK, there's just as much deforestation and habitat loss as there is in Africa and Asia, and we tend to think, oh, it's over there, and it's really not. We need to look after what's in our back garden as much as what's over there, just because perhaps a gorilla or an elephant is a bit more iconic than a northern bullfrog or a sand lizard, but they're just as important in terms of the ecosystem and life on Earth, I guess.
Absolutely, and yeah, it's hard to get. Well, it's hard to kind of get people excited about wildlife when you're not there and you're not seeing it. But yeah, how many people would not associate a reptile with the UK? But yet here we are. We do have them, for example, and we know that obviously as a taxonomic group, reptiles are incredibly hard to get people on board with. But yeah, we are very nature depleted in the UK, and like I say, there is a lot of work to do, which is actually another part of your role. So you are part of the IUCN Native Species Survival Working Group, one of the many different bits that you do. So yeah, I would love to have you back in the future to have a native species episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned obviously how the Ghanaian government are very much, you know, dictating what WAPCA does in terms of its operation. But could you just give us a bit more of an insight into how WAPCA came to be?
Yeah, sure. So, we're a non-government organization, but we're very fortunate to have a very good relationship with the government because in Ghana, all wildlife, all forests belong to the government. So we have to go through them, but as I say, we have a very good working relationship. But we started back in we were officially registered in around about 2007. And it was kind of at a time, I guess, where zoos were really shifting their purpose from just being entertainment entities to conservation organizations that I think they are more and more in recent years. And it was Heidelberg Zoo in Germany that had rollaway monkeys, and they were looking for the in situ equivalent. So they were working on the ex situ of the species, and they wanted to support something in situ. And they really struggled to find anything that was that kind of specific at the time. So they created WAPCA, and they went to a number of zoos in Europe that had either rollaway or mangabeys, or just had sort of West African species, and said, look, we're trying to create this NGO. It's going to be based in Ghana. Would you be a member and donate every year an X amount of money? And basically they said yes. And that's now grown. We have 20 members of European zoos that either have rollaway or mangabeys. And we're trying to expand that now to Dianas and Patas and king colobus and all these things as well. And they started with one coordinator in country, and then that coordinator tended to change every 4 years. Was a Westerner, still is a Westerner, with starting with a breeding program and then looking at the wild populations. And I joined in 2014, so I was a zookeeper before that for 10 years at ZSL. But fell in love with mangabeys and learned about WAPCA and went out there, and then did a master's, and then the job came up to be program manager. So I to be sorry country coordinator. The job was called then, and I moved over there, and we were there for 4 years. And what I could see was we had grown significantly in those 4 years, but being in Ghana is wonderful, and working in Ghana, and Ghana is a beautiful country. There are things that slightly slows down direction. You can have a week without electricity, or you kind of get caught up in some of the red tape. So I put a proposal to Heidelberg and the boards. We have two boards. We have a Ghanaian board and a European board, to remove myself from Ghana, but be as a program manager, but actually give the responsibility really in the coordination to my Ghanaian team in country, and again bring those people to the table and elevate them in responsibility, which they gladly agreed to, which was good. And so now we have this newer version. We have two captive sites, one more traditional zoo, and one is a soft release, sort of a semi-free enclosure. If we go down the release road, and then we have two projects in the field. Then we have a huge conservation education programs, which is run by all these different coordinators who do a fantastic job and make me look very good. But I can concentrate on getting in those stakeholders, putting that funding together, the kind of the day-to-day running at a management level, and develop the NGO, and the guys in Ghana do all the activities, which is not easy. It's not, in the field, it's a really difficult terrain. It's very swampy, but they're brilliant at it. And then the team in Accra, which is the capital city, look after the captive sites, and run the education and the research as well that we do. So we have a whole research project, and run by support from our membership, but other zoos come in and will give like one-off donation to do something very specific, or we have funders like the French Development Bank, Limelight Foundation is a new one that recently came in, that fund us as well. So we are very fortunate to have a lot of support, and we thank them very much for that support. But the what's brilliant about the funding from the zoo, it's guaranteed every year that there's going to be this core funding. So even if you have to write these funding applications that you don't know whether you're going to get them, and they're only for a set period, we know that we've got this backup of these zoos that are always going to pay into this membership and be there, so we can keep running the organization. And what was fantastic was, even through COVID, which was the hardest time for zoos because they weren't getting that income from their visitors, they still supported us. And what visitors can see when they come, there's a direct, your ticket money. You see these animals in whatever zoo it is, Heidelberg Zoo, Barcelona Zoo, Dublin Zoo, and your ticket money is going out to this organization that is saving the wild cousins of what you're seeing today. So I think WAPCA, I think, is a very good example of what the role of zoos now play. And they are a conservation organisation. Without them, without good zoos, because not all zoos are the same, but good modern zoos, WAPCA wouldn't exist. So when people talk to me about what I do, God, that's brilliant. That's really good. Oh, no, I won't go to a zoo. Go, well, what I do and what my team do wouldn't be possible without zoos. And that's the role of zoos, what zoos play. And God, we'd love there not to be this need. We'd love to be, a planet where all our animals in abundance, but we're not. So we have to have this entity. And as you know, the care and welfare that goes into good zoos, is above and beyond what I think sometimes people realize. And certainly the keeping staff will do anything, literally anything, for the animals that they care for, and make sure that they have the highest level of welfare for those animals.
Yeah, and certainly to add to that, what I'm learning through, the various guests that I've spoken to for this podcast is that the standards of care that we are giving to these animals in good, reputable zoos are now, like you say, being transferred over to the projects in situ. And so those standards are also being transferred. So there's another face for why we should be advocating for good zoos.
Yeah, and we've done that quite a bit, but we see it as an exchange of knowledge, because there's stuff that here in the UK and in Europe that we do with our animals, but we can still learn from our friends in range countries as well, because they equally work with those animals every day. So I really see it's like, it's not one-way transfer of knowledge, it's definitely a two-way. And we've been really fortunate in the last couple of years, thanks to donations from Yorkshire Wildlife Park and a private donor, been able to do exchange visits. So we've brought Ghanaian, my ex situ project coordinator Foster, he's been able to come over. Then we've had keepers from Yorkshire Wildlife Park, Greg and Jasmine, go to Ghana, And then just recently, thanks to Wildlife Vets International, we brought our 2 vets over. And it's you know, as you know, you can't always learn everything from a book. So having these experiences both away can just be that so valuable. The difficult thing is getting visas for Ghanaians, which is very frustrating. But that aside, the exchange visits have been really valuable, and we really encourage that for keepers that might be listening to this podcast. If you want to WAPCA, come out and visit WAPCA and see what we do. We always welcome people visiting, and we just can have that knowledge sharing opportunity, basically.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm certain there's probably no shortage of zookeepers that would attest to the value of networking over. Like, yeah, great, go read a book in your spare time. But yeah, I would put money on it that more people would attest for networking over reading a book most days.
Yeah.
So in terms of obviously roles of zoos, we've started touching on it, and I want to now shift on to your role as the EEP coordinator, because we've mentioned how the species or the individuals held within zoos are advocates for their wild counterparts, but obviously there's a lot that still needs to be done in terms of that goes on to ensure the right animals are existing, kind of thing. So could you just tell us a bit more about your role as the EEP coordinator?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you've got a captive population, you need to really manage that on primarily a genetic level, so that you know that you're not inbreeding, for essentially, so that you're not going to get a population that's so inbred they no longer can breed, and then that's it, game over, kind of thing. But also now looking at the behaviors of those species, and it goes beyond genetics. Okay, this male and this female are the least related to each other, so we put them together. That's kind of your kind of genetic level. But we do need to look at those social behaviors, and try and replicate as much as we can what would be happening in the wild. So trying to, with primates in particular, with Diana monkeys, leaving the females or the males in the group for as long as possible, so they get that experience of, how do I look after a baby monkey? We see if we take females out of a breed of their family group too soon, or before they've seen another offspring born, when they get to be the mother first time, they then often just go, "What the hell is that?" and reject the baby. So we really want to make sure that we're replicating that. So we try to move towards more of a natural population group. So historically, and still sometimes does, Guenons are kept in a 1.2 group, and that's your standard group. But we know that they live in larger groups than that. So we're really trying to build up that those kind of group sizes if we can. But it's tricky because you only have so many to work with, and that's really now why, certainly for the Diana monkey EP, it's a ISB as well, so it's an international stud book, which I'm also coordinator for. So reaching out to our friends across the pond in America and even Japan now, because we are running out of options. As is right, zoos are building bigger and bigger enclosures. But as you build those big enclosures, your species numbers go down. So we need to manage that, which is fine and the right way to do. But what's great about that as well is we can look at mixed exhibits. And again, looking at how do they look in the wild? Well, Diana monkeys run with a number of hoofstock, number of other primates and other things. It gets a bit tricky when you've got prey and predators. You don't really do that. But mixed exhibits are just fantastic, because so you can use this big space and you can use all levels of it. So but Leipzig, I think it is, they have hippos, or it might be Bavell, hippos with Diana monkeys. So you've got this hippo using this level, but then what's happening up here? Nothing. Okay, let's stick a Diana monkey in there. And then, you've just got this whole new dynamic, which is not only enriching for the animals, but also for visitors. So they're a very popular mixed exhibit is a mangabey and a gorilla. and the interactions you get between two quite well, gorillas almost entirely terrestrial, and the mangabey that is semi-terrestrial is just fantastic. Like if you go to Gaia Zoo, they've got their black-crested mangabeys with their gorilla. To Valencia, they've got, and it's just a different level of viewing. So that's what we're trying to do as an EAP coordinator, look beyond genetics. Genetics is important, of course, and to maintain that we look at it in terms of, so we do the maths. I say we, there is population biologists that are much smarter than me in ER's office. We go, right, how many births do we need each year to ensure that our genetic diversity, we look at it at 100 years, and have we got what we call founders? So founders are wild genes that aren't represented in the were new into the European population. And of course, we don't now take from the wild, but depending on how many you started with, obviously determines how many different genetic pairings or genetic individuals that were completely different to start with. So that's when it starts to get a little bit more complicated. But there's all these different factors playing into whether your population is going to be sustainable in 100 years. And there's software that does it for you that tells you whether it will or not, or if you have X amount of births. But again, that's where WAPCA comes into play, because another role that WAPCA plays is we're part of the mangabey for the white-naped mangabey, Cercospis lunilatus. We're actually part of the EEP program for them. And what we're able to do, because unfortunately mangabeys do come into the pet trade, we can confiscate them. It doesn't happen that often, but it happens. And that is a brand new bloodline into the global population of mangabeys. And although they should never be in a zoo because they're wild, we can make a positive out of a very significant negative by injecting these new bloodlines that aren't anywhere else. So we in our captive sites, we exchange with Europe. So if you go to Landau Zoo in Germany, you will see Charles is their breeding male, and he was confiscated from the pet trade. If you go to Barcelona, they have Raki that was born in Ghana. So there's another role that WAPCA plays by bringing in these bloodlines that mean that we can genetically diversify that mangabey population. If we could do that with Diana's as well, we don't see any coming into sanctuaries, but I think it's something we could certainly explore. For rollaway monkeys, we did have two wild rollaways, but they never bred, sadly, and we don't see them come into the pet trade at all. And again, it comes back to what I was explaining to you earlier. They're high canopy users. They're not going to get caught in traps. And as we know, if you do get a pet monkey, it's normally several monkeys have died for them to get that pet monkey. But there's it's more just as a byproduct of the bushmeat trade. In fairness, it's not a huge primate trade in mangabeys. For other species like patas, it really is, which is a whole different conversation. But yeah, so that's what I do as an EEP coordinator. People tell me we've had this birth, it's a female, okay, we've got this male now, he's getting to the age that he would disperse from if he was in the wild, right, we now need to find him a new female or group of, but what we try and do is move the males and try and keep, as the females breed females, we just change the male out, so he's no longer related to all the offspring, and so we can try and build up that female group by changing the male, because obviously you can't have your dad as also your husband.
Certainly not.
Yeah, the neighbours would talk.
They
Yeah.
definitely would. So how can everyone get involved with conservation of Diana monkeys, even if they aren't directly involved in conservation?
Well, I think you can always visit your zoo is the first step, a good zoo. Whether they have Diana monkeys or not, there will be probably projects potentially that zoo supports that are in the same landscape. And I think as consumerism is always the main one as well. So where are you getting your lump? Where is your table made from? If it's wood, where is your palm oil is the big one, because palm oil is in West Africa. Where is your coconut oil is another one. Where is your chocolate coming from? All these key produce are are from West Africa predominantly. So it's making those decisions and being a bit more informed, I guess. And it's quite easy to do now, if you go to your supermarket, you can follow the Frog Rainforest Trust, um, the sustainable palm oil. It's not as difficult, I don't think, as it was once. So uh I think consumerism has that power to change the big guns, as we can do our thing on the ground, and that's good and grand, and it has some change. But until governments and big organizations change their practices, we're really on a downward trajectory, which is we're slowing down the extinction risk, but we're not completely turning it around. And that's something that we really want to work on, is reversing. There's a big campaign called Reverse the Red, and it's trying to reverse that trajectory, and make it more positive. And I think, yeah, just being aware of these kind of issues that are in Africa, if we're specifically talking about monkeys in West Africa, but as we know, it's across the world, in our back gardens, in South America, in Asia, in Africa. There's this, we can support and help in those ways as well.
I'm glad you mentioned reversing the red there, because you've also been I have been a red list assessor, and I do want. This is something that I've wanted to touch on for a while, because it's, as a visit to a zoo, it's easy to look at the signage, which is great. It's a legal requirement of zoos to have signage, and commonly you see kind of the IUCN red list assessment of a particular species, but what goes into giving an animal that assignment? Because it's probably easy on paper, and even when I first started my career as a zookeeping, I was like, it's a numerical value. But could you just tell us a bit more about what determines an assignment for that classification?
Yeah. So it's very data based, data heavy. You need to have the data to back up um what you think is happening in the range country, in the country it's in, or what have you. And so there are a number of criteria that we look at a species when we're determining what its a red list category is. And that's based on population size. How big is the population? Um, and when we talk about IUCN red list population, it's not all the animals that are. It's about how many mature individuals that are functionally contributing to the reproduction of that population. So it's how many numbers they are, and how they have declined over what we call 3 generations, and is that threat still present, ongoing, or stopped? And all those things you put in together to look at where it falls in with that criteria. And then you go down, and then there's another criteria that's based on, where are your animals? Are they really spread out? Are they all over the place? So if something happens here, your population here is going to be okay. So their extent of occurrence. However, if they're all in one spot and something happens in that one spot, that's your whole population gone. So that's another criteria that you can add in. And so onwards and onwards, and you can go through. It's about 6 different criteria that you go through, and each criteria will give you an output. It's in terms of your level of red list. So criteria A, as we say, under that criteria, it may be just vulnerable. Under criteria B, it's endangered. On criteria C, it's critically endangered. And when you have them all together, you pick the highest one. So it's highest level. So it's critically endangered based on population size, something, something, something. So you even though it's vulnerable in another criteria, you don't add that. You go for the highest one. So you get all this data together, and it's a lot of maths. It is a lot of maths, but again, thank God for technology. There is a software that does the maths, but you need to understand, as a red list assessor, the principles behind it and the terminology. As I say, population size just being one example of what we would perhaps understand something, IUCN Red List have a very distinct understanding of it, and you need to make sure that you understand that, because it's incredibly a clever system, because you apply it to all taxa. And as we know, all taxa have very different life cycles, and but you can apply it completely across the board. So it's really it's really fascinating to go through that process. It's quite complicated, but it's also very, very clever, and really is a barometer of extinction. How likely is this animal going to go extinct, essentially, and takes everything on board. So, and unfortunately, if you don't have that data, it's very difficult to do a red list assessment. And so when you can't trigger any of those categories A, B, C, D that I was going on about, the species gets a category of data deficient, which means there just isn't enough data, but it doesn't mean that it's not potentially critically endangered. And sometimes people look at that, when they look at a sign, and they normally have the standard IUCN sign where you've got extinct in the wild, critically endangered, vulnerable, and so on and so on. Data deficient tends to be at the end of that line, and there's sometimes a communication that people see, oh, data deficient is grand. It could be as critically endangered as other species. We just don't know. So that can be a little bit misleading, but it just serves as this kind of knowing how these species are doing. But what's great now is there's this green list, so you can now get a green status, which is really brilliant, because the red list is a bit depressive because everything's critically endangered, and when we try and look at conservation, we try and have some conservation optimism to try and say it's all, it's not all doom and gloom. There is still hope out there. And that's what the green status does. It goes, right, this species was on this trajectory of going extinct. This is the conservation input here, and it's now on a steady upward incline. Or if we'd not done this, this is what would have happened. So it kind of goes, actually, we are doing, if we'd done nothing, this is what was happened. If we stop doing something now, this is what's going to happen. If we carry on, this is what's going to happen. And what's brilliant about that is because when you are applying for funding, a lot of the time, you'll get the guidelines saying only a threatened species according to IUCN Red List. So that's vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered. But almost by the time you're at critically endangered, the hope is kind of gone. But equally, you almost want to keep your animals endangered, because if they're not endangered, you're not going to get any funding. But rather, so it kind of can be a little bit misleading. Whereas if we have the green status, it shows, look, they are now only least concern. But if we don't carry on these efforts, it's going to go back up to critically endangered. So it kind of really is a really useful tool for those funding applications for those species that are least concerned, near threatened, but being proactive rather than being reactive to, if we wait till they're critically endangered, there's already a path set, and they're just here by what we call an extinction jet lag, that just by time there's a population existing, but they're all old and they're going to die, and then they're gone. So they're no longer a functioning population, and they're going.
Sounds very much like a double-edged sword. But yeah, the green.
But red listing is really fascinating, and it's a really, really clever way of. And I've been lucky to do done the training course as well, so I can train people to be red listers as well. And the team in Cambridge, the red list team, they are an amazing bunch of people. Like, I work with a lady called Caroline, and her knowledge on red list, because every animal, or every taxa, every plant and fungi has its very specialities, and Caroline can just apply it to everything. I was like that, but the principles are the same, so it works. But her way of taking that specialism of that species and then putting it into the red list is that team are incredible. They are an amazing group of people, and a very small group, and massively overwhelmed. So trying to keep the red list up to date is difficult. So that's why having other red listers out there is really useful, and those experts to get that information and applying that criteria is really, really essential to really understand what's going on our planet.
Yeah, you read my mind there, actually. In terms of, I was going to say, being a red list trainer must be really handy because I would imagine it's safe to say that it is an incredibly understaffed thing in a way. If you just go on the IUCN website and you're inundated with tens of thousands of different species, not only animals as well.
Yeah.
And you see, you click on the Diana monkey one, and it's last assessed in this year because, yeah, how do you physically have the manpower to assess every single species
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
single year?
And the thing is, we have these within IUCN, we have these species specialist groups, and they tend to come together to do red listing in terms of, so they're made up of experts. So you have your primate specialist group, and within that you have your African section. So when it's time, like every 10 years, to review the red list, they will come together as experts and bring their data with them and do the assessment. But then it all has to go to Cambridge because the people that bring this data together aren't necessarily red list assessors. They can be red list assessors, or they can just be experts that have the data. But Cambridge have to then check that the data that they've used and the way they've applied the criteria is correct. So, or they're not doing all the assessments, but they're certainly checking them, of course, because it's such a globally recognized authority. It needs to be, of that standard. So you do have these specialist groups across all the taxa that put the data together. But yeah, the Cambridge group still have to, and that's the global one. So then there's also national red lists as well, which when you're just looking at a country and you need to distinguish between those two assessments as well. And that's sometimes when it can get a bit blurred as well. So because a species on a global assessment can be least concern, loads of them, or near threatened. You then bring it down to country level, regional level, and they're critically endangered. But it's interesting where you see some organisations perhaps advertising that they're saving a critically endangered species. They forget the little caveat that that's only in the regional. But that's equally important because, again, these areas have their own ecosystem. So it's not that species conservation isn't important, but there's two very different assessments going on there. That you just need to be a bit mindful of.
Yeah, I think I was always aware of how crucial it was to have the information of an animal's assessment, but I'd never really considered it in the sense of, for lack of a better way of describing it, but like a Dragon's Den style pitch for getting funding.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, the red list unit, and the that concept isn't a priority list. They don't say this one is more it's just a measure of the likelihood of how quickly they're going to go extinct, essentially a barometer, as I say. For them, that is what it is. It's not this animal is more important than this animal. It's when you get down to the funding level, that's when the funders start to make that distinction. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's been really insightful. I've actually really enjoyed discussing that because that's just a personal little bit that I enjoy. But yeah, kind of now on a more light-hearted note, what do Diana monkeys mean to you, and kind of what is your favourite thing about Diana monkeys?
Well, I think Diana monkeys, I think it always comes down sometimes to individuals and animals that we've perhaps worked with. And I was very lucky when I was at London Zoo to work with 4 Diana monkeys, 2 males, Tinga and Frank, and 2 very feisty females called Mikia and Biri. And they were mother and daughter. And we brought new males in, and they were mean. But they are, as all animals are, I guess. It's a bit of a cliche. They're just real characters. And I think that's when and the same with the mangabes. When the white-naped mangabes came in to London, I was really fortunate enough to spend a lot of time with them and to understand them. And that led me to my career path, and hand rearing one, who's gone on to breed uh, in Germany, and all these things that just have those connections to Diana monkeys and mangabeys. And we had with Biri, she was an old lady, and she developed diabetes. So we actually trained her to take a hand injection. She'd come in, take some bugs or whatever, and we'd give her an insulin shot twice a day. And I think whenever you train an animal, you do kind of, and you to do that, you spend a lot of time with Biri. And we used to have to test her wee for ketones. And so if she weed, we'd suddenly have to dip the dipstick in and see what her levels were to make sure that we were managing her diabetes. But there was this one beautiful moment with Biri. She had this call that was like, it sounded like she was saying yes. She'd go, yeah, yeah. And just one day, my boss, my team leader, Tracy Lee, was with me at London, and we were looking at the Diana monkeys, and Biri came over, and I said, and like jokingly, I said to my boss, I said, oh, I can just make her wee on command, and she'll tell me that she's going to wee. And I just said to Biri, I said, are you going to have a wee? And Biri just went, yeah, and then weed. And literally, my boss nearly had a heart attack there. And then she's like, oh my God, that's amazing. And it was just so funny because obviously it wasn't true. It just happened. And yeah, Biri was she only had like one tooth. And she's a lovely character. And I have a picture of her just I'm looking at now. And yeah, just real characters, just monsters sometimes, with poor males that would come in and they would gang up on him, and not to any, they'd just chase him around or whatever. And Frankie Doodle, and we'd have the Mangabeys and the Dianas in the same house, and when they start calling, you just get this kind of grumble of the male Diana monkey Frank, and then the call of the male Mangabey, and it was just this beautiful kind of cacophony of calls that was just lovely. So yeah, I think yeah, when you work with an animal like that, that's certainly where that passion comes from. And I think this is something that connects me to West African primates like the Diana monkey and the white-naped mangabey. Definitely, they just they stole my heart many years ago. And some might say obsessed, I just say passionate, but I'll leave that for others to debate.
Yeah, I think whatever people choose to determine it as, it's easy to see that you have that spark when it comes to West African primates, and I can certainly see that, A, from this conversation, but B, just from this list of notes of all of the different roles that you have. But yeah, in terms of all of those different roles, would you say that there's quite a lot of an overlap, and that's not to take away from all of these things that you were doing, but would you say that kind of, for example, being the vice chair of the Afro-Eurasian tag and part of the primate specialist group, it's all kind of interconnected?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it has to be. We can't be working in isolation. That's just very short-sighted. We all have, you're never like signed off for knowing everything about mangabeys. It's always a learning process. We can always learn. I think if you don't look at everything on that collaborative level and that sharing of knowledge level, I think it's really short-sighted, as I say. So I think yeah, we we all work together and complement each other. Again, it's you looking at the one plan approach as well. And with the primate specialist group, it tends to be more in the field, whereas obviously the tag is within the European collection, and crossing those two over and working together and benefiting from one another from our knowledge, I think can only bring better and more meaningful impact for the species that we're trying to protect. So yeah, I think it's crucial. You've got to be like that. You've got to have um, that kind of want to share and listen and learn, even if you've been working in the industry for 50, 60, 70, because you do get people that have dedicated, their life to it. But we're always learning. There's never a time where you know everything, because everything's changing, and we find new things out. And animals adapt, like you said at the beginning, so then what we thought they do due to their new environment or the pressures being put on them, they change and learn and adapt. So I think we're doing the same as well as humans.
Absolutely. So yeah, Diana, thank you for giving us a real in-depth insight into the trials and tribulations of Diana monkeys and the role and foundation of WAPCA. So yeah, we do now just want to focus a bit more on your career. So when did you know that you was going to get involved in zookeeping and bioprocess conservation?
Um, I wanted to be a zookeeper since I was about, I think, 7 or 8. And it's a really not now looking back, the best reason. I was 7 or 8, and so I watched Blue Peter, obviously, as we all did on UK television. And there was somebody on that had a pet monkey. So as I say, not the best, not the best looking back, not the best encouragement. And I wanted a monkey. And then from that kind of as a child grew into again the cliches of watching Gorillas in the Mist with Diane Fossey, Jane Goodall's uh, uh, kind of National Geographic videos, and that kind of passion for chimps and gorillas really is where I first really kind of read everything about it. I could name you all the chimps in Gombe, and I used to, come home from school and had this VHS, video of Jane Goodall, and I used to watch it, and in it she's in Gombe, and she says more about me probably than anything. She used to have like a tin of cold baked beans, and I just thought it was the best thing. So I used to go and get a tin of cold baked beans and eat them while she was eating them to sort of be like her, which is odd now. And I'm not sure why my mum didn't intervene and go, I'm not sure that's the best diet, but anyway. So that kind of was where it started. But when I was at school, I wasn't very good. I wasn't naughty, I just wasn't very good. And my careers officer said, "Oh, well, you need sciences and all this." And I was like, "Wow, that's that kind of nail on the head." And followed my dad worked in the film industry, and I kind of followed him into that. And into I did hospital radio and media, and that led me to the Edinburgh Fringe, and I started working in comedy, and then I became tour manager for comedians as well as working on the film industry as well as assistant directors on model units, never with actors. It was always with the models. So the most famous one being the Harry Potter movies. So my dad built Hogwarts, and I filmed it in Shepperton Studios. And then it was when I was working on a theatre production of 12 Angry Men, which was we kind of mashed it up, and instead of actors we had comedians, and I was involved in that. And one particular comedian actor always spoke about monkeys in his set, monkeys this, monkeys that, blah blah. And when he got married, I decided to adopt him a monkey. And I looked on London Zoo's website to adopt a monkey, and I saw there that you could be a volunteer keeper. And I was like, oh, that's the best. So I used to work in film and long hours. And then on a Sunday, I'd go and volunteer at London Zoo, and did that for 6 months or something. And then at London and other zoos, they take on summer staff, so they take on additional staff. So it was a decision there whether I went back to the Edinburgh Fringe and did another year. I'd already done 10 years as at this point I was company manager, or do this summer season at London Zoo. And I decided to do the summer season. It wasn't a very difficult decision, and also, moving from comedians to primates was also quite relatively a straight line.
Transferable skills.
Yeah. So yeah, and then that summer season finished, and I went back on tour, and then yeah, got offered a seasonal position again, and then that turned into trainee, qualified senior. And then during that time, we opened Gorilla Kingdom, a new exhibit, and we were getting this brand new monkey species, a white-naped mangabey, and yeah, the rest they say is history. I just fell in love with the mangabeys there, learned about WAPCA, went out and did some research into breeding success, went out to Ghana, and that's where I learned more about conservation. I think being at the zoo, it has obviously a large conservation program, and decided that that was kind of my next kind of route. I love being zookeeper. Zookeeper was the best job in the world, and privileged to work with lots of different species, not just primates, big cats, some lovely bearded pigs, two beautiful camels, and two gorgeous pygmy hippos. But I kind of felt that that was kind of the conservation might be the next kind of stage. And again, was fortunate to be at ZSL to be able to pick the brains of conservationists, um, and do a master's part-time. And just for my master's, my final thesis was going back out to Ghana and surveying the forests where I saw wild runaway monkey, which was just breathtaking. And just really, by chance, when I just finished the master's, the country coordinator at the time handed in her notice, and so I was like, wow, this could be it, kind of thing. And which would mean leaving, London and living in Ghana with my husband. And it was interesting because I didn't actually get the job the first time or that point, but it really I was really disappointed. I went, oh no, this kind of really is what I want to do. And luckily for me, the person they did appoint turned it down, and I was second choice, and off I went. And then from that kind of, I was already sort of going to the EASA conferences, but it really kind of enabled me to get more involved with the tag and the primate specialist group, and meet lots of other kind of conservationists in the primate world, and be able to develop that kind of long list of stuff that I do. But I'm working with some amazing primatologists in Ghana, Professor Edward Wiafi in Zakoni, who I already mentioned. And I'm incredibly fortunate. I do a job I love for species of monkeys that I love. And I think you're certainly not in it for the money. So it has to be a passion, because it's not always easy. And as I say, it can sometimes, you see a lot of, um, animals that are going extinct despite your best efforts. But you have to, and for me, we get interns and people in their early careers, they kind of say, but how do you keep that optimism when you see forests literally being wiped out for illegal mining or what have you? Go, well, for me, as long as there are species, as long as there are mangabeys and dino monkeys and runaway monkeys still in the forest, then there's still a reason for me to go to work every day. And you have to, while they're still there, I'm still going to be there for them. And yeah, I'm incredibly lucky. And when I moved back to the UK, I still wanted to be in a zoo environment. And a friend of mine was working at Paradise Wildlife Park, and she said, you should come in and chat to the CEO, Lynn Whitnell. She's looking to try to do more conservation work. So we had this meeting, and now I am sat in what is now Hertfordshire Zoo, what Paradise Wildlife Park became. And they host WAPCA in the UK. They give me this office, and I work with them one day a week on their conservation strategies and policies as well, which is, as I always say to them, it's the easiest job in the world, because they're so passionate about conservation. I just go, do you think we should do this? Yes. It's just because they are so driven by conservation, and they do so much, which is really surprising. They're, classified as a small to medium zoo, but they put some of the big zoos to shame. They are so, so passionate beyond just funding. It's materials. It's been, working with the ICN. It's supporting me. It's sending out materials, education. They do so much. It's their complete purpose, and it's incredible and inspiring. Their kind of, as a family, their kind of commitment to conservation. So yeah, and now I travel out to Ghana. I go backwards and forwards 4 to 5 times a year, go in, check in on my team. And they're all, as I say, they're all incredibly dedicated. And then leave and then come back to the UK. So I have this great kind of position that I get to kind of go out and hang out with them in the sun and the warmth, but then come back and be near a family and things like that. So yeah, I'm very lucky to be able to do what I do. And I'm not, when people sometimes ask me about, oh, how do you get into conservation? I'm like, I'm not sure I'm the most traditional path, but this is what I did. And I guess, as I say, if you're passionate about something, if you really want to do it, don't give up if someone says you can't. Have that tenacity, go, well, there must be a way. Because someone said to me, forget mangabeys. You're too focused on mangabeys, too obsessed with mangabeys. You're never going to get a job in conservation for mangabeys. And I go, well, look at me now. So, Never say never to me. It's like the worst thing you can say because I just have that kind of, that's me going, right, I'm that
Prove you
pedantic.
wrong.
I'm going to prove you wrong. Um, and I did. So I think for anybody that's, kind of going, where do you start? Go and volunteer at a zoo, find out what it's all about. Give up your time for free. All those roles I do, I don't get any more money for it, unfortunately. But it's because you've got that passion for conservation of whatever species that you care about. Um, and if you give up your time, that will be rewarded, because I think, especially with zookeeping, but also conservationism, people have an idea of what they think it is. They think it's, going through the rainforest, and tracking animals. No, it's not. It's doing your tax returns and your salaries and writing funding proposals. There's a lot of non-glamour, or majority of it is non-glamour, but also zookeeping. People think zookeeping is cuddling monkeys all day, and it's not. It's dealing with a lot of feces and hoses that won't wrap around properly, and just stuff that, but it's all part of the job, and it's part and parcel of it and what makes it great. But I think sometimes it's good to kind of get a real understanding of what you actually think you want to do rather than what you think Disney tells you it is, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, I think your story is a very kind of insightful story for that non-traditional route, because and there's a reason why zoos ask for degrees and animal related qualifications. Not saying that that shouldn't be a thing, but I've seen it myself. We've had amazing volunteers who, they are considering a career in this field. And it's that happy medium of both, isn't it? You could get a first class honours, but if you can't be on your feet 9 to 5, 8 till 5, 8 till 6, some of the working hours are crazy. Um, 6 days a week.
Yeah,
That degree isn't going to get you as far. It's like, say, it's that happy medium of both. So getting your foot in the door as a volunteer perspective, or like, say, people who think it's too late to transition into that career. We see volunteers who have done it 1 day a week while they're working an office job or an IT job, who, yeah, they persist. It might take them a bit longer, but
yeah,
they get there.
absolutely. And I always say that, you can have the degrees, and obviously that's important. I'm not saying don't go to work hard at school, but if you can't remember to lock padlocks, you're not going to get very far. There's that practical element that it's not an exact science that you can suddenly, oh, now I know everything because I've got this degree kind of thing. I think it's super important. Yeah.
So I think you've kind of really given us a great insight into your background, and we're going to finish up the episode with some quick fire, not serious questions, just to
Oh
kind of
gosh.
yeah, just to kind of get to know what makes you tick. Obviously, we know it's primates largely, and that's great. But yeah, are there any other dream species that you'd love to see in the wild or work with?
Work. Now, gosh. Um, I'd love to see pygmy hippos in the wild. I love pygmy hippos. I work with them. Um, but also I'm quite scared of animals as well from working in a zoo. Like the Whitnell brothers here went to India and saw tigers in the wild. I'm like, no way do I not want to be uh seeing a tiger that can get to me. And so it's quite funny in that way. But obviously, other primates, I've never been to Costa Rica or South America and things like that, where you have all the howler monkeys. Um, I don't like butterflies, so I don't want to go anywhere where there's butterflies. Um, uh, just any animal. I think it's funny. You think you have your favorite animals until you see an animal, you just go, "Oh my God, that's the best thing." That you don't think it would be. I kind of do that all the time. But yeah, but pygmy hippos are cool. I think would be my other species that isn't a primate. I think, yeah.
Would you say Costa Rica is in the on the cards at some point in the future?
If I win the lottery, yes. No, yeah, I'd love to go there. India, more Asia. I'm very African focused, obviously, but yeah, other continents would be lovely.
And we've obviously talked about native species, and we know that introduced species can have profound impact, which will be discussed in a future episode, hopefully. But if you could have one species native to the UK and it didn't have any negative impact on the environment or the ecosystem or anything like that, what would it be?
Um, hmm, wow. I think, yeah, I think I would probably, now that's tricky. See, I think most people would think I would say mangabey because obviously I'm very, I like my mangabeys, white-naped mangabeys, but I also like a bearded pig as well.
That would be cool. That would be
Yeah,
cool.
yeah,
I would
or
have
more
understood
dot.
if you said a primate though, because
Yeah,
we could do with a primate in the UK. Certainly not a great ape or anything like that running
yeah,
around.
nothing that's
Um, but yeah,
smelly.
we're not hitting that niche. So
Yeah,
yeah, a primate would have been a very good answer. But yeah, a bearded pig, great, love a pig.
I love a
So
bearded
yeah,
pig.
and when you're not working, how do you keep busy, or I mean, or not keep busy?
I sit on my sofa a lot. It's the number one a top relaxation. I walk my dogs. I
Mhm.
have two lovely dogs. I love dogs, so I walk them a lot. Um, yeah, and hang out with family, I guess. I have two amazing nephews, twin nephews, Jensen and Austin, that are just the best and hilarious. And I get to give them back at the end of the day, so that's always good. I love hanging out with them because they're just way smarter than I am. It's just ridiculous. Like, when you're sort of used to pretend that you didn't know what they were talking about. I genuinely don't know what they're talking about, and they have to explain it to me. Um, yeah, they're just the best. That's my favorite thing to do.
Awesome.
Be with
And
them.
what are you doing once we've finished our conversation here today?
Oh, well, the glamour is I'm working out a budget for this year for one of our projects. And I'm just now looking at my list of things to do. I've got to review some abstracts for the EASA Conservation Forum that's coming up. And I've also got to look at my Diana Monkey recommendations, funnily enough. So I've just sent out a questionnaire to all my Diana Monkey holders just to update me on what animals they've got where, if they had to split any groups up, what's coming up surplus, if they're looking for anything they're bringing into the enclosure, like another Diana monkey or something like that, just to get a sort of an annual questionnaire, just to get a good idea of what's happening in the zoos. And I've got to go through all them and just see if I'm going to make some recommendations based on that. So I have that to do. And that's about it for today, I think. Yeah. I have a list. I love lists. So I have a list for every day in front of me. And then I always like to put something on that I've already done so I can scratch it off straight away. So it makes me
Nice.
feel a little bit better about
Yeah.
myself. But I love a list.
No, I'm
So
with you
I
with
have lists
that.
everywhere.
I see a huge benefit in lists. I will also be adopting your idea of putting something that you've already done on it because I don't do that and it makes me feel rubbish.
Yeah. I highly recommend it.
And last question then, what do you think should be the biggest takeaway from this episode for our listeners?
I think for me, as program manager of WAPCA, for people to take away the role they can play by visiting a good zoo, by visiting a BIASA accredited or EASA accredited zoo. Because as I said, without those zoo memberships, we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. We wouldn't have a functioning a team in Ghana that's able to get more funding from other places to do the work we do. So I think um, go visit your good zoo. If you've not been a zoo for years and years and years because of whatever, go see what's different, what's changed, learn about the welfare, the animal training that we do, and what the role zoos play in conservation, because they play a huge role, and sometimes we're not brilliant at saying that enough or joining the dots enough. So I think um, that would be my take home is for people to really appreciate the important role zoos play in conservation.
Yeah, a very thought-provoking point to finish up on there, Andrea. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining the podcast today. I've thoroughly enjoyed having you on and look forward to having you back on in the future. I'm sure we'll get into native species in great context too. But yeah, we'll be sure to keep up to date with any developments surrounding Diana monkeys and the incredible work of WAPCA. So yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
And there it is, folks. Another episode of the Conservationists Assemble podcast has come to an end. I've thoroughly enjoyed having Andrea on the podcast today, displaying her wisdom and passion within conservation. Thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in as always. If you've got a spare minute to like, share and review or rate the podcast, it would be greatly appreciated, as this helps the podcast to get discovered and spread the word of the amazing work happening in conservation around the world. Your opinions and stories are important to me, so please do give the podcast a follow on Facebook or Instagram and interact with the podcast. I would love to hear from you. Be sure to keep your eyes and ears out for more awesome stories coming soon. Until next time, goodbye.